finally good to be home after all those hours of over.
Well, hello there, fair traveller. Would thou like to peruse our wares? We have the finest goods from all across the four corners of this 5-tatami room.
Mate, you gotta at least keep some things in this house sacred, right? You can't just be coming into my room and trying to set up a shop here. Like, what are you even trying to sell?
How about the magical Quickle? Said to be able to clean even the dirtiest floor stains with ease.
No, I do not want any of your garbage.
I understand. You're one of those kind of people, right? Give me a second here. There you go, take one.
What? No, I don't want any of your stupid gambling shit right now, okay? I want you to leave.
What do you mean this isn't working? Don't you wish to purchase my goods? All of these wonderful treasures. I learned it from this RPG game over here.
To begin with, the game doesn't even have a shop in it.
They don't? I thought that's something you do in all RPG games.
Are you serious? Yeah, of course I'm serious. Like, have you even played the game that you're talking about right now? There wasn't a single store in this game. Yeah, like, if you're trying to use this as a guide on like what to do as RPG, like tavern salesman who plans to get rich of the hero, this is the worst possible game to be using for that. Not like it's a good idea either way, because this game, also another horrible game.
Well then, Slave, I guess this isn't a business venture that's gonna be working out for me. Very well, go make your silly video. I'll be waiting to not watch it as usual, you peasant. And I'll be off to find my new business ventures. Perhaps find someone else somewhere else in these four corners who'll be interested in my wares.
Wait, you forgot the thing. I suppose just one wouldn't hurt. You know, I feel like it would be no exaggeration to say that RPG games have for a long time been quite a big driving force within the Japanese game industry, having been what propelled many of the biggest companies to where they are today, and it's still a genre which many companies are producing games for, and there are still some of the more successful titles for some of the big firms out there, such as Square Enix, for example. But while it's true that many of the big and good RPG games of the past have come from Japan, it is also true that with all of the success, there will always be the huge number of titles in the bottom that just end up not doing as well. And the game we're going to be talking about today is another one of those games. A game that made many bizarre choices over its development, and that was so bad that the publisher actually came out and apologized for even releasing this game in the first place. The game that we're going to be talking about today is Last Rebellion. So, Last Rebellion was a game that was published by Nippon Ichi Software, which we're just going to call NIS for now because it's a lot easier to pronounce. It was a game that released in 2010, although according to reports or interviews that were given by NIS themselves, apparently it had been in development for more than 2 years. It did so badly that it actually won Kasou Game of the Year for 2010 within Japan, which once again, for those who didn't know, the games that end up on this list are typically voted into the list and then are voted on by multiple reviewers who try to convince the people who know about the game why the game that they're talking about is the game that they believe to be the worst game that is out there. So it's not just a site run by a dude who decided to do this on their own. Especially back in the day when this used to be a bit more of something of a community thing. It used to be something that the community in general would decide on to some extent. So it really is the case that with this game, it would mean that many people looked at it and just thought it was that bad. As I mentioned before, the game was so bad that in an interview later on, NIS actually apologized for how bad the game was, and they actually began to cut many of the future projects that they had in progress that they were working with other companies to actually release, where NIS would be the publisher for the games those companies were releasing instead. Because yes, while this game actually has Nippon Ichi Software in the name at the bottom over here, you would notice a second company over here software called Hitmaker, which for those of you who are wondering, no, this is not the same Hitmaker that was the development division within Sega. This was a company with the exact same name, but the main difference is that typically in English when people write out the names, with Hitmaker, the Sega division, they will write the two words together, and with this company you would write it with the two words separate instead. So that very marginally small difference, but it made a very big difference in terms of the quality that the companies released. In fact, the company Hitmaker that produced this game actually saw all of their future projects with NIS actually get cancelled, and after like 4 years after the release of this game, the company eventually went bankrupt with, at the very least, no known other titles that they had released between that period. What do you mean they got the name of the game wrong on their website? They made the fucking game! So, yeah, I don't know how. Surprisingly, amazingly enough, they managed to get the name of the game wrong on the website. This is in spite of the fact that you literally have a screenshot of the cover of the game beside the title, meaning that whoever looked at this simply did not give enough of a fuck to change it after putting up the image and realizing the letters are different. However, after having played the game and looking through the credits, it would seem that NIS was actually somewhat involved with the production of this game, considering the fact that Nii Kawasohei, the creator of this game, was actually a producer on this title as well. And you know, considering he's there as the producer, it also does mean that as the producer, you do have, typically in most Japanese companies that I've worked in at least, the ability to decide whether or not a game should even be released in the first place, right? Your whole job is to actually look at the product that is constantly being delivered to you during the respective deadlines that you set for the stretch goals or whatever goals you have for each of the milestones, and then decide whether or not the project is worth continuing or whether or not more people need to be added to the team or people need to be fired for that matter. All of that decision making is typically done by the producer as well to some extent. So the fact that the game eventually did release, while they do claim that most of it was basically developed by Hitmaker, they did have the creative ability to influence whether or not the game came out, and they did choose to actually release the game, and I guess that's probably why they apologized for it as well and decided to improve their systems for judging whether or not to release a game. That and the QA, the quality assurance of the game, was all done by the NIS team instead. So suffice to say that they did at least have some idea of the product that they were releasing, considering the fact that all of the checks to decide if the game was of quality was also being done in-house by them. But that said, aside from that, there really isn't as much to talk about with the backgrounds of the company, as we really don't really get much information about Hitmaker itself, as not much has ever been spoken about that company specifically. And Nippon Ichi, they actually kind of restricted the amount that they actually wanted to talk about when it came to this game, it would seem. So ever since the initial interviews they gave around the time that this game released, there hasn't been much else that has been out there. So there isn't as much we can talk about in terms of what was going on within Hitmaker itself, the same way we did with Image Epoch with you know. So yeah, that's all we really have to say about the backstory of the development of this game itself. Now, let's get into the more important part. How good was this game even? Let's look at it together. So first and foremost, before we actually talk more about the game itself, one thing I really have to say is that the opening for this game was actually really well done. Everlast by Kageyama Hironobu was just phenomenal. I enjoyed it so much. It was actually such a vibe listening to this. For those of you who don't know, that's the same legend who sang the original opening for the Dragon Ball anime. You know, the Chara, Hey Chara, that guy. Same person who sang the song for this, and it really shows because the song was so good. If you were to go to the actual official video on his channel for this song, you would go there and see people praising the song like, bruh, this shit is fire. Shame the game actually wasn't though. So the thing is, I would love to show you guys the song on this video, but the thing is that on advice from certain others, and actually went to test this myself, it would seem that even putting in the smallest fraction of this song would get the entire video claim. So we ain't gonna be able to do that. So instead, here is me just hyping out and vibing to the opening what I was playing when I was playing the game. That probably didn't do the song any justice at all, but that just goes to show how hype it was. And I would recommend that if you are really interested in it, to go look for the song. It's called Everlast, not Everlast like everlasting, but Ever space last. You know, because the game is like the last rebellion. A shame that the name Everlast became more fitting, because it would seem that this game would probably be forever the last game to release in Japan in terms of like how good it is for the year that it was actually released. The opening screen itself was fairly simple. You just have new game, load game. You don't really have the ability to toggle any options before entering the game itself. There isn't really a difficulty setting either. You just go straight into it, hard and raw, like you actually sticking the raw CD into your PS3, I guess.
Yeah, you know you want it, don't you? Yeah, take it all in. Take all of the Soen.
I don't know. So the first thing you're gonna notice though with this game is that the voice acting in it is a little
Hey! The hell are you doing, Gramps?
As you can see, I'm merely testing out my blade on a few trolls.
And before you ask, no, this is not like an English dub of the game that was actually released for a foreign audience. This dub was actually used in the Japanese version of the game as well, meaning that people in Japan were actually probably getting like one of their rare few opportunities to actually experience what an anime dub that's typically done for like anime in the West would sound like translated for them, which I find to be really weird, especially since the games, at least the main story, is fully voiced, which I feel like typically most games you will actually want to tap on the star power that the voice actors within Japan have, especially, you know, if you're making a game for Japan within Japan. And this is the part where some people might be like, yeah, but it's English dub, of course it sucks. But no, you know, when a Western, let's say an American game, for example, like GTA, right? When the game releases in English, the voice acting actually sounds pretty good. Like, it sounds realistic, like what you would expect people who speak English to sound like, rather than what the people who do anime dubs always seem to try to do. And the thing is that maybe this is because they are trying to match the pitch, the mannerisms of the Japanese voice acting, and this leads to that very cringe sounding English that people don't really like. But the thing is that this isn't just an English problem, okay? As someone who watched the Japanese dub of SpongeBob,
Happy setにスポンジボブ
それは素晴らしいおいそこは笑うところじゃないぞイカルド
No, this can never match to like the levels of like energy and raw, like bubbly personality that the English dub of SpongeBob has. Localization of voice and mannerisms, it feels like in general just doesn't seem to have that same level of oomph, especially when the work is something that is not native to the region itself. So potentially some of the mannerisms or the way that the characters speak are things that may not be as familiar to the people who are doing the dub, and so things just tend to be a little off as they try to mimic what the original was like. Because the thing is that if you wanna like meme like English dubs, like Dark Souls was pretty fine, right? Like most of the From Software games, even with the Japanese release, are also voiced in English, and they're already very good, I would say. So like it's not an issue of it is in English, therefore it's bad, right? It could have been good, and in spite of the fact that they had the choice, as this game was not initially first dubbed in Japanese and then brought over and localized, they had the choice to go with a proper full English cast, I would think. But somehow this was the end product that they chose to go with and ended up with. And I feel like that adds a little more to why this feels so bizarre and bad in a way. Maybe they had a contract with the dubbing association for weeb voices or something to actually use their services for this game as well. But I feel like that actually ended up being a detriment for a game that was trying to release as an English first sort of thing. That, and as someone who has the good fortune of being able to read and listen in both English and Japanese, I can tell you now that half the time the Japanese and English just don't match up at all.
I'm sure he's around somewhere. He wouldn't die that easily. What the hell are you talking about? Damn it, woman! Wake up! Where should we go from here?
If I'm not careful, I could seal away every single soul in the world.
I don't know how this happened. I think they gave it to the English voice actors to voice, and then they just sort of just rolled with that without QCing or like doing QA to check if the two actually matched up. So there was some level of mismatch there, and I don't know why they didn't just change one or the other. Like if it's too expensive to get the voice actors to retake the scene, why not just rewrite the scripts to match the thing? It feels a little low effort to just put it into the game as is. But then again, the audience on either side probably wouldn't have noticed the difference, so I guess this is not as bad of a thing perhaps. That said, when people within Japan talk about why this game is so bad, the thing that typically comes up the most is the battle system, because the battle system is actually kind of unique, but I feel like it was just really poorly implemented. So the way the battle works in conjunction with the story, to explain it really quickly, the way the story works is that you basically have two different characters, a guy called Nine and a lady called Aisha. The guy is a blade, which is a person who basically has like supernatural magical powers that are given to him by a god to be able to like kill monsters, and the lady is a sealer, someone who has the ability to then seal the soul of the monster, because the god of life is somehow this dude man bro thing that basically works in a very warped way of what we consider a god of life, in the sense that he isn't just responsible for the birth of all life, but he's also responsible for the process of reincarnation, and therefore because of his influence, monsters when dead don't actually stay dead, they'll just come back to life. And the goddess of death and destruction, Mictelia, she basically ends up being the one who blesses the blades and the sealers with their powers and gives them the ability to seal away the monsters to ensure that they don't have the ability to reincarnate. And so in the world setting, this goddess of death is kind of the good guy instead, in a way. And what happens in the plot is that the guy Nine basically gets involved in a assassination attempt on the king, which causes him to die in the process. And basically, in order to save his life, Aisha basically merges his soul into her body or something to that extent. And so the battle centers around a character who is basically two people in one. So basically, you only have one character in a turn-based system with one HP bar and like MP and everything. So the two characters, while they can both act individually, you will basically be able to perform an action with both of them once during each turn. They both share the same like stats and parameters in terms of HP, MP, and all of the other consumable parameter resources. But when it comes to attacking itself, Nine, the man with the red hair, basically has, I think, a 1.1 multiplier to physical damage, and Aisha has a 1.1 multiplier to magic damage instead. In the way the battles work is that you can't outright use magic from the very start. Basically, you need to hit enemies with melee attacks to mark them, and once they are marked, you can basically start to cast magic spells that damage the marked parts. So, and the way all of this works is that a single enemy would have multiple parts that you can mark, and you basically deal magic damage equivalent to the number of marked parts and the efficiency to which the parts have been marked, which will be signified by a multiplier within the game. However, in order to perform well and to apply like highly potent marks on the enemy and to increase the amount of damage you do, you need to use the melee attacks to target the weak points on the enemy, and this would then, if you hit the right weak point, increase the multiplier added, which is shown in the bottom right by the text with the word bonus, and this also increased the amount of multiplier applied to each individual part. And the way the weak points work, to be more specific, because as I mentioned before, you need to attack all the different parts of an enemy in order, and if you hit the part at the right point within the order, it becomes a marked weak point. However, and this is the big problem with the whole thing, these points aren't actually disclosed to you at the start. You actually kind of need to figure all of this out for yourself. You know, in a way, it's kind of like Fate Extra, where you don't know what the enemy's actions are gonna be initially, and you kind of have to play rock, paper, scissors with them in Fate Extra. So in and of itself, not a completely horrible system. It's a system that tries to put you, in a sense, in the position of the blades, I guess, who are like people who go around like hunting and fighting monsters, where you need to figure out its weak points to try and defeat it. As you input the order of the parts, if you actually manage to get a specific part right, that part will then show where the question mark used to be as that specific number, so that you can then start guessing the rest of the parts, knowing which ones are already in the correct order. So basically, the way the battle would flow was that you would kind of spend multiple turns using physical physical attacks to kind of guess which parts to hit in a specific order. And once you have gotten that, you can then, from then on, for every single instance that you fight an enemy after, effectively beat them by using these marks to your advantage, as the game actually does allow you to both save the order that you have already inputted, and the more you do this, the higher it piles up your bonus. And the bonus is actually very important to pile up in each individual battle, because the higher your bonus gets, the more it influences specific stats that you have as well, including this entire list here. It basically increases your attack as well as your magic attack damage the higher the bonus is, your accuracy in battle, because the melee attacks in particular have a very real propensity to miss, especially if you're fighting enemies of an equivalent level to yours in the areas that you're in. And this is the biggest one. It also affects the amount of EXP you get from the battle, which I feel is probably the strangest addition of them all. Because the way the formula works in this game is that it basically takes the base EXP multiplied by 1 plus the bonus number multiplied by 0.01, meaning that if the bonus gets to 999, you are basically effectively going to be getting 10 times the amount of experience from the specific battle, which, as you can imagine, this basically means that you need to use this system. If you don't use this system, because of the fact that this is an RPG game and leveling up is kind of central to it, especially because it's turn-based, you are going to be very left behind and heavily punished, because you're going to have to do 10 times the number of battles that someone who interacts with the system appropriately uses. And it also means that if you're unlucky, you're going to be heavily penalized because of the fact that it takes you much longer to get to the point where you have all of the numbers required and where you can finally actually like farm and get significant amount of EXP, which is also a problem because the higher your level is compared to the opponent, you actually get less EXP as well, up to the point where eventually you get to just 0 EXP gain from enemies that are too low level below you. So if you assume the average possibility, the average probability of what someone would be in, by the time you get to the point where you know all of the individual points, you probably aren't gonna be able to really effectively use this EXP anymore. And conversely, if you somehow luck sectored, you would basically be so far ahead of someone who didn't manage to get the order for a long time that I can imagine that, since it does feel like, to me at least, the game is kind of balanced around you being able to do this very well, it can be a very frustrating experience as battles aren't exactly very fast. Mind you, even with just 6 points alone, the probability of you getting every single point wrong is actually fairly high. Like if you were to use the derangement formula and basically try to calculate all of this out with this very funny looking moon runes over here, basically the chance of you actually getting all of the points wrong is approximately 0.8%. And as anybody who has played XCOM before would tell you, even having a 5% chance to miss is already too much. And if you think things are bad at this point, right, having to guess a permutation of 6 numbers, which once again there are 720 ways in which you can like permutate all of the 6 numbers,
Stop it. Get some help.
like it actually got really bad towards the later half of the game, especially with the bosses, where bosses have a total of 10 different parts and you have like enemies that baseline have 9 different parts at some point, and you basically need to go through turn after turn after turn trying to guess all of this, all while, remember, the enemies are hitting you too, and if the enemies are equivalent to your level, they're actually going to be doing a fair amount of damage to you. In a battle where there are 5 enemies, you're gonna have to deal with the fact that all 5 of them are hitting you, and with each one doing potentially 10 to 15% of your damage, that means in one turn, you could be taking about 50% or more of your HP, in the worst case maybe even 75%, or depending on which part of the game you're in, you might have enemies that just do like shadow bite. Never mind.
This sucks.
Just one-shotted us. Damage to them. And if you cannot deal magic damage to them,
This sucks.
Yeah, like what is balance anyways, right? Not like it actually matters that an enemy can pretty much one-shot you and they give you 5 of them in a single battle. It's not cool. Not cool at all. And to top it all off, when you're actually guessing, right, you might think that like, oh, but if there are 5 enemies, I can just attack all 5 of them with a different order, and therefore that will help me to guess the right order even quicker. Yes, and if this game actually worked in a vacuum like that, I feel like it wouldn't be as bad, especially if they actually properly balance the enemy's parameters as well. However, in order to be able to use a physical attack on the enemy, you are gonna need to use your CP on them. Now, don't worry, this is not the CP you're thinking about. I feel like people who consume that kind of CP usually are the ones taking the physical attack instead. That said, the CP replenishment in this game is pretty bad. Like, you get back 3 points a turn, and every single attack on an enemy consumes 1 point. So if you had 5 enemies and you had to attack all 5 of them, that means that you're gonna consume 30 points and you're gonna regenerate 3 points at the end of your turn. Now, the thing is that technically, if you were to defend against an attack, you also get back 3 for every attack you defend. However, you have no way of knowing the attack movement priorities at the start of the turn. And what this means is that sometimes you go faster than the enemy, sometimes you don't. So if you don't go faster than them, you can't actually block. You just take all of the damage before you can block, and then you just feel like an actual idiot. So it makes it very hard to actually time the blocks to actually accumulate the points needed to attack the enemy. And your CP bar has only a max, especially the early game, of like maybe 30 plus, meaning that you're gonna burn the entire bar just attacking like 5 different enemies at once. So after the first 5 enemies you've hit, you're then gonna have to slowly build back the remaining amount while healing yourself, maybe using an item to get back more of the CP to heal, but items only give you 10%, which is also 3 points at the start of the game. Or you could use the spell that they exist within the game to heal it instead. And the spell is probably the best way. The only issue of using the spell is that it basically consumes one of your 2 character actions, and it basically leaves you vulnerable to getting one-shotted in a turn because you are basically not able to heal during this turn. And depending on the speed order on the next turn, there is the possible chance that the enemies of, like, if there's 5 of them, could get 10 attacks in before you actually get to heal. So there's a lot of risk of failing and dying. And if you die, all of the numbers that have been noted in the order will all be erased because the game just puts you to the main menu and expects you to load from there again. So I hope you actually remember to actually note down the numbers on a notepad somewhere like a little boomer, or you're gonna lose all of your progress. Yeah, progress! Who needs that anyways? Another thing as well is that if you actually kill an enemy with more physical attack points inputted than actually needed, you don't get refunded the points, meaning that like if the enemy has like 6 parts and you target all 6 parts, but because of like crits and good rolls, you kill the enemy in like 3 attack parts, the remaining CPUs in the last 3 parts are actually just tossed out the window. You don't get it back either. So that kind of also really sucks because it basically means that you are in all situations pretty much just burning a shit ton of it, and you're not really given many good ways to slowly build it back. There is another way you can do it, which is in the overworld. You can actually hit a weird looking green vial thing on the map, and that will also regenerate a little bit of it for you. But the thing is that the cooldown on that is also fairly long, so you're gonna have to sit on the oval map and constantly hit the thing, which basically means more time spent just doing next to nothing important within the game to basically get back the resource needed to grind for more EXP. That, and when you try to seal the enemy with the sealer, because if you kill an enemy, they don't die, they just go unconscious and then they revive within a turn or 2. If you do not seal them away, the sealing action itself also consumes CP. So you have multiple different situations where you need to use it, and your recovery rate is really slow. And the thing is that when you cast a spell, after it has hit the enemy, after a turn or 2, the marks get removed from it again. So you will eventually, if you can't burst down the enemy quick enough, need to constantly reapply the thing, which means even more use of CP, which basically means that you will never really have enough until the end game. So you're gonna be stuck in a lot of situations where you're gonna be wasting turns in battle just doing nothing, being defensive and dawdling around to try and get back enough CP to actually do anything at all, which in the case of some battles can be enough for you to just like outright lose. So yeah, it can get pretty rough against the specific types of enemies due to how strong and overpowered some of them can even be when you're early within the game and you're off the same level as they are. And to make things even worse, the animations are all like really long in general, and escaping from the battle is also seemingly quite difficult. Like the combination of the two makes trying to escape feel very frustrating as well, because even the simplest battles in the game, I think they have the possibility, or I guess the chance of not being able to escape set really high. So even with enemies that I can one-shot and that will give me 0 EXP, so it's a waste of my time to want to interact with them. Sometimes I just cannot run away from them and I'm forced to waste CP hitting them just to get away from the battle. And the thing is that when you attack like 5 different enemies, for example, the animations, they actually take quite a fair bit of time. Like, just look at this, for example. Like, there's so much time between animation cycles that I actually had enough time while playing this game to sit around and reflect on everything and write portions and like the bullet points on my observations and like parts of the script during the game itself, because there's just so much time where I can't do anything within the game, right? Because at the start of the game, it doesn't sound that bad. 6 parts. You reach the end of the game, enemies, even the mobs, can have like 7 to 9 parts, and there's 5 of them on the field. And after attacking them with all of the 5, like 9 hit combos, you then have the other character, Aisha, using the magic spell to do damage to all 5 of them, hitting each part individually again, and then going to the next turn. And if you manage to miraculously one-shot them, good. Then there you can finally seal them away. So it takes a lot of time for just a single turn, assuming that you can even one-shot them in a turn. Otherwise, you're going to have to take that cycle, repeat it the next turn, and hope you don't run out of CP halfway through. Or you're going to be stuck in a bunch of cycles where you're going to have to watch the enemies hit you back. And the enemies' attack animations as well are about as lengthy as the players want. And in spite of that, in spite of the fact that the animations are so lengthy, they don't really even look good either. They're just very generic attack animations. Half the time, you can't really see what's happening either because of all of the like numbers popping up on screen. You don't even have like animations for dodging an attack, right? If you want to like double check, you just have to look through the attack log and notice that it just says in like small text there that you miss an attack. In between, the fact that you might have like 45 like damage numbers that's rolling out over and over again, and that can actually affect to some extent whether or not you can one-shot an enemy. So that type of information that you need to make a good decision is not really being very well translated or telegraphed to the players either. And because of that, because the animations are so bare bones, like every single spell more or less has the same animations. You don't really have a super attack that has like a very cool, unique animation, right? You don't have like a limit break in Final Fantasy. No, they just use these same animations for every single spell attack, and only the effect on the enemy itself actually changes. So it just makes the entire process of going through a single turn feel like even more of a drag. And even after all of that, right, CP doesn't actually recover post-battle. The only way you can recover it is by casting the spell during battle or hitting the green vial or the natural regenerations that happen during the battle itself. So if you had like one big battle with multiple enemies and you burn a huge amount of CP, now you're stuck in a situation of when you go into the next battle, you don't have enough. So now you're stuck again with going to the next battle and being stuck in the defensive play that wastes multiple turns of you staring at the enemies as they cast their very slow and boring looking attack animations on you, or wasting time going back to the green vial to slowly smack it and regenerate your CP, which is also a problem because enemies on the map respawn so quickly that by the time you actually get your CP back, the enemy that you beat on the world map probably has already respawned on that spot, so you're gonna have to go through them again. So overall, what I'm trying to say, think about it this way: you have a highly limited resource to do guesswork with, to even hope to do decent damage to the enemy, and you are only really rewarded when you do the guesswork correctly. So you are highly incentivized to sit and dawdle on a battle until you get a fair amount of bonus and you get the whole guessing thing right, which means that a single battle, especially the first few battles, might take a long time, during which you actually have a real risk of dying, and if you do, you kind of need to make sure that you have everything noted down on a piece of paper or somewhere else outside of the game, because the game doesn't save that information between you dying and restarting the run, or while sitting through many lengthy and boring animations during that process. So the process of going through that guesswork, it's not like you can just quickly guess 6 numbers, then guess again, then guess again, and guess again, like you're playing Wordle or something. This time you actually have to guess, wait maybe 30 to potentially 50 seconds, guess again, wait another 30 to 50 seconds, guess again. And as you can imagine, that means that just getting through a single enemy's guesswork, which a single battle can have multiple enemies, takes a long time as is. And the worst part is that some enemies look almost exactly the same. Like you look at these two, can you tell the difference between them? There apparently is a difference, right? One of them is apparently like the commander and the other isn't, and because of that they have actual like different weak point orders as well. So if you kind of can't tell the two apart, you kind of need to check specifically the name and make sure that the names are correct, and then start to guess based off of that again. Let's say you complete a battle without actually managing to guess off the parts. You have everything written down on your handy dandy notebook. That's right. Then you kind of have to like make sure that when you attack the next enemy that looks almost exactly the same, you make sure that it is the same enemy. The only way you can do it is through the name. Otherwise, you might potentially like fuck up your own guesswork as you get confused as to why all of the numbers you have guessed till now aren't working anymore. And as if the battle system itself, in and of itself, wasn't bad enough, the wall map, like you moving across the overworld between points and all of that, it really added even more to the frustration of all of this. So moving across the wall map, it's fairly simple. It's just like in every other RPG game with an overworld where you just run around on the map, enemies appear on the map, you can try to symbol attack them, or where you attack them on the map and it gives you like a bonus advantage or something. Fairly standard stuff. Many games have done that as well, and except that no game does it as bad as this game does. I feel like the hitboxes on the enemies or on the player, maybe, I can't tell which it is, seems to be so big that before I can even like get in close to hit them, I feel like I'm already running into them instead, even though there's like a fairly big gap between me and them. The attack animations on your slash for your symbol attack is so slow that by the time the enemy spots you and runs towards you, you have a very small frame of time where you can actually hit them before they actually just touch you instead, because of how big the hitbox issue is. And not only that, walking into an enemy from behind, they seem to have like 360 vision or something. They're all like that one guy with the white eyes from Naruto or something, because if you walk into them from behind, they'll just instantly turn around and spot you and then start running towards you. So you don't really have the ability to like walk in close from behind and try to symbol attack to try and get the drop on them. Instead, you have to like panic run into them, hope you don't get fucked over by the hitbox itself, and try to smack them with your fairly short range attack with a long wind up. I feel like typically with these kind of systems, most games, what they do is they make the hitbox fairly small or like fitting to the individual character sizes, so you can actually walk in fairly close to them, especially from behind, where most games typically make it such that they don't have a version range from behind, so you can probably sneak up onto them. And even when you can't, they typically have it such that the attack range of the symbol attack is fairly long. Like typically the attack itself might be the thing that feels like it might have a little more of an additional hitbox rather than the individual characters themselves. And on top of that, typically the attack animation itself is fast, so that when you push the button, you can just like get the attack quickly, so it makes it a lot easier to gauge when to push the button. And especially under a high pressure situation where the enemy is already running towards you, it makes it a lot easier to do. And on top of that, for some reason they decided to make it such that enemies will pursue you endlessly for as long as you're within the area, and they seem to move at almost equivalent, if not slightly faster than the player at all times. So if an enemy spots you and you run away, it's not like you can run to the other end of the map and eventually they'll give up the chase and you can like slowly do whatever you wanted to do again. And when you turn, they'll just get the opportunity to touch you because you need to turn into a corner. So it's very difficult to run away from an enemy simply because your base speed is just complete garbage. And the worst part is that the way the maps are designed, especially at the start of the game and many of the earlier maps, is that they tend to be so narrow that because of how big the hitboxes on the enemies are, you don't even have a way to walk past without starting the fight. Like there was some in the start, especially with the mountain range. The areas are so small like this that you don't really have a way to slip past the enemy because the hitboxes are bigger than the enemy's model itself, and also because of the fact that they will spot you from a distance, because once again, enemies have 360 vision range within this. So if you were to try to slip past them, but before you can even get like perpendicular to them to like be right beside them to get past, they're probably going to spot you before you even like get close to them. So they will start to turn, and as you try to run past, they will just run into you. And so like with these small narrow passageways and like narrow ravines that make up this area and the cave after this and the mountain range after this, it makes it very hard to run away or like to slip past enemies that you don't want to deal with the battle of, which in the early game you could say is it's not an issue. But when you need to backtrack later on, it becomes a problem because you get forced into battles and the game doesn't let you easily run away from them. And a simple attack does not immediately eliminate the enemy either. So you're kind of just forced into these battles over and over again while trying to get back through the area again because of the way the areas were designed. And on top of this, after the battle ends, there's no grace period before the overworld starts reacting again. Like the moment it ends, the moment the game fades back into the world, the moment it starts fading back into that world, everything around you will start to move again, meaning that if you ran forward hoping to get past away from the enemy behind you and you got an enemy in front of you who you basically spotted you and ran into you, once you beat this enemy, the enemy behind you, as the screen is fading, it is already going to start running at you, meaning that you have to be really prepared to immediately be sitting there with a finger on the controller pushing up so that the moment the screen fades in or starts to fade in, you immediately start running away to ensure that you run away from the enemy that's in hot pursuit behind you. Or it's just gonna like cause you to get trapped between both of them and you're instantly gonna get attacked by both because the enemy behind you does not like go into a sleep mode or anything. It just continues to stay in that suspended chase state even when you look back into the world. Items used outside of combat also for some reason have an animation per use. Like typically, you know, like you play an RPG game, you're outside the battle, you're like, oh, my HP feels a little low, I kind of want to use a potion. You just go into the menu and you just like rapid spam the potion button and it just uses like multiple very shitty potions so that you have a avenue to at least still use the less valuable potions that you have quickly outside of battle. This game doesn't have that for some reason. They let you use the item and then somehow every single item you use, like every single copy of the item you use has a little animation where he's actually using the thing. So it actually makes trying to use the less valuable items to heal multiple times feel like an actual chore because like let's say you're at like 10% HP and when you heal the 90%, you're gonna have to go through the animation loop, reopening the entire menu 8 times in order to do it. The game also has no quest markers on the map telling you where to go or reminding you where to go, and there is no quest log either. So in the off chance that you forget what you were doing, or like me, right, you picked up the game somewhere in 2024 and things got really busy, you had other stuff you wanted to make, and then you came back in 2025, there is zero way for you to know what you're supposed to do or where in the plot you are. And you have to remember, not only am I like growing old, I'm also someone who streams and also makes videos, so I have triple the memory debuff that a normal person would have, right? Remembering stuff like this can actually be a problem for me sometimes because there's a lot on the plate that I need to deal with, especially if the game doesn't give you a full proper hint. Like sometimes they will just say like, oh, maybe we kind of need to go in a specific direction, right? We need to go that way, and like if you don't know the exact way, you don't really have a way to double check where to go. Or if you find the language to be vague on where your next destination is, that isn't really a good way to know where that destination actually is meant to be. So especially if you had to put down the game for whatever reason, coming back to it, it's gonna feel horrible in the end because you don't really have a good way to keep track of what you need to do in the game. Not like it's actually gonna be that much of an issue, I guess, that you can't really see on the map where you're supposed to go for the quest, because the mini-map itself is also hot garbage, because like the game actually has a fair bit of elevation where, you know, like typically with most RPG games, you don't really have that much elevation in terms of like a top-down like level. Most of the game typically takes place on a flat plane. Maybe you have like hills or like slight ledges that you need to jump up on, but you don't have like 10 different floors that you need to like deal with going up and down. But with this game, you kind of do have that to some extent, and the game doesn't really do a good job of showing you the levels of elevation within the game, or for that matter, where the paths on the map even are very clearly. Like, you can look at the map here, it's kind of very faded, and trying to figure out where the paths actually link or join up can be really difficult since you really need to open it to its maximum and stare at it really hard to figure out some of the paths. Like at the start of the game, you're supposed to go to a very specific path which takes you through a very small path in between all of the large areas, and yeah, I just genuinely did not notice that path was there initially. Like you can just chalk it up to being old and having bad eyesight, but it's really difficult at times to just like look at the map and understand or see where the smaller paths are on it, because it's just that much smaller and the colors used don't make it very obvious either. So the minimap becomes kind of useless in some areas. It also doesn't really show things like the danger zone. So like there's one area where there's like magma on the floor, but it doesn't show on the map, so it's very hard to gauge like how far the magma stretches for. So like if you were like trying to experiment a little and you're like, maybe I can just like run through it and use items along the way and try to quickly get through it, yeah, you can't really even get a good grasp of how far you need to go to make that judgment call in the first place, because the game doesn't do a good job showing all of this information either on the minimap. There is a very weird thing where like when you stand on a ledge, some ledges you can't fall off, some you can. And I'm not saying like, oh, I'm going to fall off the ledge and like drop into an abyss and die or something. No, like even though you know there's like ground at the very bottom, some ledges don't let you jump off of it, but some ledges you can just casually fall off, especially with the jank controls in the game where you have an inverted camera and there's a bit of a delay in the input for like you trying to turn and like how the character like moves at times. There is a very real chance that sometimes with the very narrow areas like the mountain cave, for example, you could just fall off like a floor or two and then you have to redo like all those floors to climb back up again. There is no quick shortcut that you can open at some point in the dungeon to make it easy to backtrack through it if necessary. The game doesn't have that system at all, right? It's not like in like Dark Souls where you can open a gate at the end of the pre-boss area that opens the door to the hub or the start of the zone instead. You don't get any of that. So if you fall off, you just get fucked. So yeah, but between the jank enemies on the overworld map, the weird and like hard to pass actual like mini map, as well as all of the different inconsistencies in terms of whether or not you can jump off certain ledges or not, all while having to deal with like the game not giving you proper clear direction on where to go, as well as the design of some of the areas that make you waste a lot of time getting past enemies if anything. It already feels like a horrible experience, and I feel like you would probably have a less painful experience dipping your balls in car battery acid than actually trying to get through like the entirety of this game's world map as is required to actually complete the game. And this is all made even worse by the fact that at the end of the game, before you can get to the second final boss, if I'm not mistaken, you actually need to backtrack across the entire world map. Basically every single area, every single zone you pass by within the game, there is a secret item hidden in each of the respective zones, and you basically need to go back at the end of the game after you get the magic ability to look for invisible items on the map to then find the item in every single area, which will then be used to unlock the path to the second final boss. So yeah, like going through the areas once wasn't bad enough. You're gonna have to go through every single one again at the end game on like the most insane and unhinged like fucking fetch quest I've seen in a long time. Hey, look, I ain't here to judge. Whoever it is having, I don't think I want any of that. But at the very least, it looks like he's having quite a good time. So whatever works best to get him through the plot as quickly as possible. Like when I first saw the quest, it actually blew my mind because like you think it wasn't that bad because like you go up like one floor and then the little like mini man, the Ewok over there was like, oh yeah, you need to get the item from the first area to like get past, but it's hidden. And if you manage to figure out from that what you're supposed to do, because it's really very vague and they don't give you any more hints other than that, and you go back to him and you do the thing and you unlock the path up, guess what? When you go up a floor, the same thing happens again, and then they tell you to go to the next area again. Meaning, if you didn't know from the start that you were supposed to do this, you're gonna be stuck in an even worse and less optimal like world exploration, like back and forth fetch quest, because you're basically going to go to area, go back to the tower, go to another area, go back to the tower, and the repetition of this actually increases the amount of load times you have to go through, and on top of that also wastes a lot more time going through the individual areas as well, as compared to just quickly running through the entirety of the map to get back to this tower in the end. So like I don't know why they put this in. It feels so mean-spirited and like cynical in a way that it feels like it's just there to waste your time, to make the game feel more padded out so that they can say that the game is actually fairly long. Like that's the only reason why I can feel like they added this in, to make you walk through and appreciate the environments that they have designed, and also because they have no better idea of how best to stretch the story to reach a certain length. And to be fair, I can kind of see why they need to do it, because the game only has 5 acts and each act is only about an hour plus, meaning that for an RPG game, this game is less than 6 hours on average if you know what to do. If you don't, or if you suck at the game or you have bad luck, this game could probably take you like 40 fucking hours because of all the grinding you need to do, all of the restarting from getting one-shotted by enemies at your level that happens along the way, all the running through and getting lost in the virtual areas, trying to figure out the map, trying to figure out where everything is and doing the stupid fetch quest at the end. All of that could stretch the game potentially like for hours more on end, to be honest. honest. Which at that point, I don't know if anybody would even have the patience to sit through all of that. But if you had the patience, or if you're really good at the game,
you know, you could just use a walkthrough online, I guess, but
you could theoretically clear each act in about an hour plus, especially if you skip the story. I think it only takes like 30 minutes thereabout. This ain't good for my heart. I feel like it's actually gonna like give me a heart attack just talking about how bad this game was, to be honest. Speaking of story though, the story itself was also not very good, to be honest. Like, the story is very generic, and the fact that the voice acting was done in English, like, the English in and of itself, once again, I don't think it's bad, but the dialogue lines are pretty cringe. It feels very reminiscent of the era that the game came out in. Like, the language used was just, how do I put it? It just feels really cringe, and I feel like even back during its era it would have been cringe, because they basically turned the male character into your average like snarky like preteen like 16-year-old or something that you had in like movies or like cartoons from that era, and the lady is also just like the bitchy know-it-all like snarky old soul character. Like, both of them were just really very snarky and like bitchy. Like, it's not just the woman, like the guy was as well. They were just both like going like, yeah, you think you're so smart? Oh, look at the time. It's time for you to cringe. And like, with the voices especially, it just made it feel doubly cringe. Like, this whole scene with like this as well, like, I think I have seen people make adult parodies of certain like Western titles with English voice acting, and those sound better than this game does. Like, I don't know what's wrong with the voice actors that they get to voice like English content on the anime side of things, but especially back in the day, but it's just horrible. But if you're somehow interested in the plot, I guess I could just explain it through. Like, the whole plot itself is also very generic. That doesn't really have any unique like tunes or messaging or any unique twists throughout all of it. That's it. There really isn't as much for me to put on screen as I explain the story, mostly because you're just gonna be looking at low poly characters talking to each other with no voice over just Japanese text on the screen, so it might be pretty boring. So instead of just doing that and just talking over it like you're watching like some kind of commentary video from the early 2000s, I'm gonna give you guys a full proper lecture on the lore of this game. Well, yes, indeed, I am something of a scientist myself. I know this might look lame to some of you guys, but come on, I already went through all the effort. I even got little printouts of all of the characters here, or all of the important ones at least. So as I mentioned before, this game has two main protagonists. You have 9S Fell and Aisha, whatever her last name is. It doesn't really matter as much because it's not as funny. 9, right? He is central to the most of the plot in this game because he is the actual blood son to the Emperor. I think his name was like, what was it again? Azulride or something. Even though he is the actual son of the Emperor, both of their surnames aren't the same, because while his surname is Asfel, this guy's name is Lorven or something, which has to be the lamest name probably in the entirety of this plot. This nerd, right, this necromancer over here, who is the adopted son of the Emperor, Alfred Formillo, right? This nerd over here, he's the bad guy in this whole thing. He basically kills this guy over here, who is the father of this guy over here. In the process of him trying to kill the Emperor, 9 actually gets involved and tries to save the Emperor, but it just doesn't work out because he's a fucking scrub, so the Emperor actually dies in all of this. And not only that, for some reason in the entirety of the attempt to assassinate the Emperor, he also manages to kill 9. However, 9 is actually revived by Aisha, who basically has the ability as a sealer to also seal away souls into herself, not just out of existence completely. And now the two of them go on a journey where he wants to kill him to take revenge for his father, and at the same time she also wants to find a way to keep him alive. During the path of this journey, they meet this dandy old man over here called Jake, alright? And this guy, he really just doesn't do too much during the plot. He's an ex-Blade, kind of like You would think, therefore, he's gonna be like a mentor who teaches Nine how to become a better blade or something, but the truth of the matter is that he doesn't actually really fight at all. He doesn't join your party. Instead, all he does is create this whole subplot about creating battle dolls, which aren't really like the super battle sexy dolls that people are thinking about nowadays, which have, it would seem like, cause half of the gacha game fanbase to want to bang robots instead. Instead, he makes fairly simple looking robot, like kind of like Metabot things, which I'm pretty sure still has a fair segment of people who want to bang, but we're gonna put that aside for now. He became a master roboticist, robot man, whatever the fuck the word is. And he basically creates robots to try and fight off the monsters instead. Don't worry, I know we've already talked about like 5 characters that might sound like too much for you guys to take in. Don't worry, this guy barely does anything throughout the rest of the plot as well. He basically just turns up periodically to say hi and shift the plot along by basically running off on his own and trying to fight the monsters and getting his shit kicked in instead. Kinda like the other sidekick character who actually doesn't really matter to the plot at all. Meet Sephi Ines, a character who basically exists for all of those of you who basically have a kink for having little girls call you daddy because
I smell Daddy. Daddy, I've been looking for you.
Oh, you have a kid. I didn't know.
Hell no.
Men never take responsibility.
Daddy! Daddy! Give me my daddy back! You're not gonna trick me again! You're not my daddy!
Of course I'm not. I told you that already.
But you smell like him.
That's all she really does throughout the whole thing. She just calls Nine daddy and makes the user, the reader, feel very uncomfortable throughout the entire thing with all of her cringy ass dialogue. Although she kind of does at least have some level of use during the plot, because basically what happened is that many years ago, I think her dad turned into a demon or there was some war or something, and Aisha basically sealed away her dad, therefore putting him into the same purgatory as the demons. It's not exactly explained well why she even did that, other than she's just a human or poor moral character to begin with. Yeah, they don't really do anything about it either. Don't worry, during the plot this gets brought up. Everybody feels bad for a little, then everybody cleanly forgets that this ever happened, and she just kind of lives with this as a thing, I guess. But aside from that, Sephi also basically exists as a deus ex machina, because I'm pretty sure throughout the entirety of the game she maybe has like 5 to 10 minutes of appearance, and all that she does with that 5 to 10 minutes is basically call Nine daddy, and then it is found out that she actually possesses an immense amount of power within her, more so than the average person, even more so than these two to begin with for some reason, even though we don't know why or how she has those powers. It's just kind of told to the user that she does, and it's basically because of those deus ex machina-esque powers that you're basically able to get through the plot later on, because for some of the big monsters that you have really no idea how you're supposed to seal away, she comes along and is basically able to use the super death machine that's able to seal away giant monsters that Nine's father actually asked you to ship at some point, which was basically used to store Aisha's body. Yeah, that also happens. Like, you basically bring in a giant sealer robot that apparently also causes the monsters to revive, and Aisha is the cause of all of this. And for some reason, when Sephi accidentally gets into the robot while trying to look for her daddy, apparently it is found out that she has the immense power to actually power that robot. So yeah, kind of like near the end, when you kind of get written into a corner by the plot itself because of all the power scaling everyone goes through, she kind of just turns out of nowhere and solves that problem. And the one who basically helps by giving you that advice is this guy over here, once again, who basically doesn't really do anything much himself other than periodically be the speedwagon of this series by telling you exactly what is going on. And it is throughout this journey, as you go around trying to figure out what is causing all of the monsters, trying to take this guy out, and also trying to figure out how to save Nine, who is stuck in Aisha's body, you find out multiple very important but also not very important things, kind of like how the goddess who protects the world, or so they thought, was actually evil. Like, big shock, the goddess of death and destruction actually wasn't the good guy all along. Who would have thought that? Yeah, what? Like, in a way I can kind of get it why in the pure, like, aspect of what is happening in this world she might seem like the good guy, but like no one apparently thought that the goddess of death and destruction, right? Not death and war or death and battle or combat. This isn't like one of those like hunter goddesses who helps to hunt the monsters. No, literally death and destruction by their own words is apparently thought of as a good guy. And so when it turns out that she actually doesn't give a shit about humans and she gave them that power just to watch them be able to fight and die, Aisha, who's a sailor and who apparently believed a lot in the goddess, like, took it as quite a big shock. And also it is later on then revealed in the plot that Aisha herself actually kind of has like some super magical like death powers of her own, which apparently were translated wrongly by the English dub of the game itself. Like they actually really play up her powers a lot more to make it sound more destructive as it is. Where apparently if she can't control her powers well because of how strong of a sailor she is, she can accidentally seal away everyone or every single existence within a vicinity of her. So that's apparently meant to play up how strong she is, but this is only really explained to us near the, I think maybe 3/4 mark of the game. Prior to that, she seemed to be really shit at her job, since you actually kind of couldn't really do much with her sailing powers other than the one thing, which is to seal away an enemy that is already a corpse on the floor. So it doesn't really make you feel like she's very strong. Like you don't feel like, oh, she's strong enough to be able to seal away any existence when she has to hold back her powers against life-threatening threats that are coming at you to be able to only take them out and seal them when they're already fucking dead. So that whole plot point on her being like super strong and having to control her powers doesn't really matter. She doesn't actually fall into a state where that actually matters either throughout the entirety of the plot. Meanwhile, later on, just before this motherfucker dies, because yes, this actually does happen, you don't actually get to kill him. Basically what happens is that you catch up to him and he actually manages to pull off his plan, which his plan was basically to revive his equivalent of the sailor person, because apparently he was also a blade at some point, except that he was a very weak, scrawny necromancer man instead, so he couldn't actually save her and she actually died, and he became really sad about it. And in spite of the fact that she was supposedly someone with a very strong sense of justice, rather than respecting her wishes and letting her fucking die in peace, he decided that he was gonna revive her in a scene where he acts like the biggest sport brat ever.
Of course she wouldn't want this, but I don't care what she thinks. I just want her back.
I don't care what she wants, I want is her back. Like, did a 5-year-old write this plot? Either way, he brings her back. No shit, she wasn't happy about it, and he actually finds out then that he got played and like he summons a giant demon, and the demon kills him instead, and you basically beat up the demon. It is then revealed to you when you're this late into the plot, after this motherfucker accidentally kills himself, that this dude is still alive. Like, the Emperor apparently didn't, I mean, he did die, but apparently the death was a part of his plan. Like, even though he wasn't the one who asked the son to kill him and also accidentally kill his other son in the process. Apparently, according to all of this, he planned for it and he kind of died and comes back to life and basically causes some like world-ending threat to happen nearer to the end of the game. And then you find out after you kick his shit in that basically his plan was to play the two sons against each other the whole time. Like, he wanted 9 to fight with this fucking nerd, because apparently what he hoped was that through having both of them fight, one of them would eventually win and become the king, and then that would lead the world and the nation into the future. And apparently it didn't matter to him whether the one who won is guy that is a snarky little edgelord with a sense of justice, or the prick who would sooner watch the world burn for the sake of a person who didn't even want to be resurrected. Like, you don't have a very good like either choice for the two of your people who are gonna take over as the king either way. But apparently he thought that like, yeah, it didn't matter who won, we just needed someone to win and take over. As if this guy was ever gonna do that. And this guy who was basically a snarky little prick who didn't want to take over was ever gonna do that either. And so in his eternal copium, when he gets resurrected and plunges the world into chaos and then gets his shit kicked in by 9, he goes off on this monologue about how it was all planned, and in the end it doesn't really matter because 9 just fucking disappears after watching him die, and watching him die a second time and being like, oh yeah, the world does need a leader. So basically what I'm trying to say is that with the plot, like, the only thing that truly gets resolved is the fact that he doesn't actually perma-die in the end. He actually finds a way to get his ass saved, but aside from that, everything stayed status quo, because he kind of disappears from the palace and goes back to being a blade and just wandering around like fighting monsters. she kind of falls in love with him across the process of the plot, even though there wasn't really much bonding going on very much. They kind of were just being assholes to each other the whole time, and somehow eventually like there was just like some little romance thing going on, and the two of them kind of had a little thing but not really going on. She somehow realizes that he's not her actual dad, and that she has just been like huffing too much copium the entire time, and she started living with Jake, who apparently said to take her in as his disciple, I guess. That isn't really explained too much in the epilogue of the thing. Like, even up till the very end of the plot itself, he was just watching over her because you kind of didn't want to take her along on the journey, so he elected to do that, and then you just abandon her on him, and she also doesn't know what the fuck is going on. So these two really are just like left up in the air. Like, we don't actually know what happened to them in the end. He disappears. The kingdom, nothing is actually really explained about what happened to it in the end. If we look at the kingdom at the start of the game, it actually looks like a shithole. Like, this like barren ass looking ravine is supposed to be a city for some reason. A different nation is brought up in the plot as a nation of sealers that apparently got into a civil war with a much bigger empire that split into the nation that him and the Blades apparently rule, and the Sealer nation. But the Sealer nation is only brought up in actual like overarching world lore, but it's never actually a thing at all in the entirety of the plot. I feel like this game might be doing even worse, because this city they're talking about feels like the sand hovels that like Anakin was living in Star Wars or something. And you know what's the icing on the cake of all this? Like, this may not be as plot related, maybe a bit more so gameplay related. When you get to the very end of the game and you actually fight him as the final boss, you can't actually use magic on him. He actually has a debuff that actually prevents you from using magic for a few turns. So you kind of need to just brute force him with just physical damage. So you get all the way to the end of the game, and half of the game's systems, right, the ability to cast spells just gets invalidated. But because of how fucked up the game is in terms of scaling its stats and parameters, by the time you get to the end of the game, if you have leveled a significant amount, you don't actually need magic. You can actually trivialize the entire battle by just punching him in the face with just 9 alone. And that's kind of how I did the battle as well, because if even without like sitting there to grind excessively, just going through the plot and getting most of the arrangements correct to get the maximum amount of EXP, you actually get strong enough to just punch him in the face. So all in all, like, your game mechanics, the thing that's supposed to make it interesting with the whole like figuring out elements, using them to deal big damage after like marking the opponent, all of that also doesn't matter. You just use 9 and you resolve all of it. You really go back to the start of the game in a gameplay sense as well, because all you're doing is just spamming basic attacks with your CP instead. So overall, the plot just never really mattered to begin with. Mr. Bootleg Tales of Abyss over here really didn't grow much as a person. Even if he did, it was only for the short duration during the middle segment of the story itself. But by the time you get to the end of the story, all of that character development is thrown out the window, because he's the same person he was at the start of the thing. She just seems to be following along with him. Like, she grew to be an even worse person in that regard, because she just like stopped actually trying to bother to actually make the world a better place, and all of the internal growth that you go through in the middle of the story, where she figures out and like overcomes all of the grief and trauma of her past, all of it doesn't matter because of the fact that she just kind of just forgets about all of it and decides to continue traveling along with him. This motherfucker is dead. This motherfucker is dead. Nice fate though. And these two, they never really truly do anything in the end, so that's great to know that we played through the entirety of the plot for all of this to not matter. Not like it was that bad though, I guess, considering the fact that even with the entirety of the plot built in, this game was only 6 hours long. I guess at least at the end you kind of did get like if you got to the end where you reach the final area of the game, basically you can go back to your quick travel point, and from the quick travel point you can actually like fight against 2 hidden bosses in a specific like little hidden world thing, and you kind of got to fight against a Prinny, and I guess that was kind of cute and all. The Prinny was actually a really difficult battle. Like, he had a really massively high dodge rate, so like trying to hit him was really difficult, and I think like he did like 50% of my HP in a single hit. It feels more like the Prinny from that one game where the Prinny was the protagonist instead, the Prinny I want to be a hero thing, rather than like the usual Disgaea Prinny where they're like the most expendable thing in the game. I don't think he had a scarf, so it wasn't like a direct hint to that, but yeah, it certainly did feel that way with how strong the Prinny was, which feels a little like, depending on how much of a this gear lore freak you are, maybe it might feel like a little bit of an immersion break as well, but not like it really matters in this case. The rest of the game didn't make sense to begin with, so I don't expect this point to make sense either. So yeah, overall a very, very, very poorly designed game in my opinion, this whole thing. Like, most everything that happens in the overworld was just a horrible implementation of something that already exists. Like, you're basically walking through the same like world maps that most RPG games have, but everything that is done in that overworld just feels worse done than almost every other RPG that has already come out during its time. The battle system itself, it had a little bit of promise. There are some signs of things within it that could have been good and interesting if it was done better, if resources were better managed, if enemies were better balanced vis-a-vis the player. And the thing is that looking through the credits of the game, it seems like they didn't really have a full team dedicated to designing like all of the in-game battle systems. Like, there's no like lead battle designer. There were no like if you look at like a massive company like Square Enix, for example, typically they have people who are like the in charge of the player characters parameter design, and like there'll be another group that'll be in charge of the enemies monster design. For this game, you just have a bunch of people who are in charge of parameters overall, but you don't really have like designers in the game designer sense. You have a bunch of graphic designers and programmers, and I feel like maybe having people to design systems for the gameplay itself as well would have been a lot better than having a game where, if the credits are to be believed, no one was involved really in any of that. It makes me question who was designing all of these systems in the first place. And it's all just like topped off with a story that was probably one of the cringiest nothing burgers I've ever read in a long while. Like, it really like blows my mind at the end of the game, thinking about everything that I just sat through and realizing that nothing in the plot really got solved. Everybody just fucking dies that isn't you, and like the character doesn't really feel like he grows much as a person either. Like, things don't really change for the world other than you getting the, I guess, like the kink of being called daddy by like someone who sounds like a kid multiple times. I don't really like that, but okay. But yeah, this is it. This is the game that ended up becoming the worst game in Japan of 2010. I'm sure there might be games that people might argue were worse. Like, there really might be a lot worse out there, but I just feel like because of the fact that this was published by Nippon Ichi Software, and because of the strange circumstances that this game released under, especially with the English dub in Japan, which would feel like a very strange choice to begin with for game developed in Japan, it may have just caused it to have been rated even worse than it otherwise would have been. That and this game costing about 7,140 yen, you know, like this game, which has like 6 hours of gameplay there, about maybe like 20 hours of grind to like be able to clear the game if you are unlucky or playing it blind. This game, which has a story which probably like takes like less than half of that 6 hours, costs about as much as like Persona or something else. So yeah, not good by any stretch of the imagination, and I can see why people rated it as poorly as they did in the end. But that said, that's all for me for today. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this look at the what was considered at least ranked the worst game in Japan of 2010. Thank you to the people who help support the channel, the backers who help to fund me doing all the silly things that you see in videos like this, such as also getting the PS3 and all of the consoles and everything ready. And thank you to every one of you who watch, be it this video or everything else, since it also does give me motivation to continue to make more stuff when people actually find it interesting in particular. But that said, until next time, take care and bye-bye.